that thought process is so valuable. What are your thoughts on the possibilities? Do you think that can grow? Or is that just
right.
Tibetan Buddhism, you know?
Sure. It is theoretically possible for theology to try to stay so compatible with science that it never contradicts it. For example, imagine a theology which says, in the beginning, God created. Think about your typical deism. Does deism violate current knowledge that science provides?
No.
Well, it's rather designed to avoid contradiction, right? Pure deism would say, well, everything that science knows about the start of our universe and the evolution of it is just perfectly fine and dandy. It's just God supplied some initial conditions. And then if science came along and said, well, we can explain those initial conditions with some earlier initial conditions, deism will say, oh, cool, great, we'll add, yeah, and God was before that to set up those initial. And now you see this sort of runaway effect logically that I sort of set up in my first screen. If religion sticks to trying to use supernatural agents to explain initial conditions, you get this endless parrot where deism can always stay out of the way of scientific conclusions. Does deism violate the spirit of scientific method? Oh yeah, right. That's the problem, because theologies are not particularly interested, you might have noticed, in making concrete, verifiable public predictions about what a God is or is not going to do in front of our very eyes. Somehow, no matter what happens, is always compatible with God. And that's not scientific method, right? So scientific conclusions, yes. A very artificially well-designed theology could stay out of the way, right? A sort of thin deism could do it, I guess, right? But it would be contrary to scientific method. That's clear.
Right.
Swing back over here, keeping the pendulum going, please.
Excuse me, I'll this one, but from the beginning you said it was clear that, well, maybe for whoever you observed.
Speak up a little bit, please.
Speaking from my perspective, I'd be willing to agree that moralism is older than religion. And religion clearly has ideas upon cultural beliefs and action. It's obvious that religion affects morality. So following you said religion is perfectly reasonable to an unbiased brain or any human presented with the theory proposed. One of the
Did I see that?
Well, I mean, you said
Perfectly reasonable?
moderately reasonable. You said it could be valid. Could be valid.
That sounds like me. Let's roll. Develop your whole thought, and then we'll take a look at it.
You then proceeded to say that many facets of religion, like risk, need, and sacrifice, present problems to evolution. If you follow with allowing that a human's free will and action could affect the effectiveness of evolution, would you then follow up saying that religion has sought in itself to prevent some of the prevent evolution in its cultural ideals? Say, sacrificing the strongest man as a priest who is not going to reproduce.
There would have to be other social compensations. But one could imagine certain kinds of genetic traits gradually getting weeded out over very long stretches of time by religion. This is probably already happening. You may have seen it that, for example, there's been various forms of sophisticated human cultures now, oh gosh, I mean, maybe as long as 500,000 years, right? So now we're starting to see how humans being dependent on certain animals can cause actual changes in our genetics, right? So for milk drinking cultures, people lactose intolerant are going to have a harder time, just because everybody's drinking so much milk and there isn't much else to drink, I guess, until, I don't know, beer was a better time, right? But, so what you have is the idea that culture places certain demands on people, and you might expect under very long periods of time, right? The biological evolution to take place to make dramatic genetic changes that we can notice, could rule some things in and rule some things out. I'll give you another example. I've heard it said that dyslexia, right, having a hard time reading words written in with letters in right to left or left to right, whatever. Some people have a hard time reading when the script is like that. So what? We weren't reading, 500,000 years ago. We weren't reading 50,000 years ago. I mean, so there would be no evolutionary pressure one way or another for reading ability until so recently that there's been no time. But now we can imagine, right, another 500,000 years from now, where reading or its equivalent, right, symbol interpretation, it remains so important that we would have weeded out dyslexics. Now, actually, that's probably not going to happen for two reasons. Number one, there's all sorts of other sorts of cultural compensations. They just need more work, right? I mean, most dyslexics can function just fine. Furthermore, reading is a temporary technology. I mean, they're going to invent some machine that just beams it straight into your head at some point, right? So, yeah, keeping up with technology can have profound effects. Now, you also brought up free will. I'm a philosopher. I love talking about free will. But I'm not sure where you were going with that. Did you want a bit of a follow-up on religion and free will?
Oh, I was just saying, a human's ability, they can affect, like evolution, say me abstaining from reproducing, that's a free will decision that I can decide.
Yes, exactly. So, celibacy was your example.
Right.
Or enforcing monogamy or any
Right, exactly.
social institution that affects genetic transmission. Yeah, fascinating. But again, in large urban populations, there are all sorts of social compensations, so that you wouldn't expect that to have to get weeded out. Right? There's no problem with small numbers of men being celibate. Whereas there would be a problem if a religion demanded that all the members of the society be celibate. That was it the Shakers?
Yeah, the Shakers.
Right. So we've got some great furniture, but we have more Mormons now than Shakers. And I think we might know why. Right? At the biological level, we might know why. Right? That's a prime example. So if religions have theological superstructures that dramatically enhance the likelihood of large families, what would you expect to see with those religions over time? They're going to have some severe empire problems. Right? They're either going to have to expand or really learn how to make cities work, and right? I mean, that's a lot of stress. So we ought to expect theologies to be kind of careful about calibrating these sorts of things if they're smart, again, over long stretches of time. In other words, there's this sort of collective wisdom in theology. Don't experiment too crazy. It won't last. Right? Way in the back.
I have a question. I'm not sure I'm stating it the best way, but we seem to agree that religion has done some positive things, and it seems to provide hope or this psychologically